give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
To curb corruption, one must be courageous to confront and rise up against the corrupt. Sleep well, be guided by ethics and standards for peace of mind. Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. In association with 99X. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Tonight on the forum, the conversation is around foreign direct investments into Sri Lanka. And with us, we have Anarkali Moonesinghe, a director at Anemoi Investments, an advisory board member for Advocata, and a board member for the Lankan Angel Network. Hi, Anarkali. It's very nice to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Anarkali, let's start our conversation by setting the stage a little bit. Given the prevailing political and business landscape globally, which is of course being impacted by everything from climate change to wars, in your assessment, what is the prevailing state of FDIs from a global standpoint?
Thank you, Ruwandi. So I think, from the time of COVID, we seem to have gone from crisis to crisis, right? We went through COVID, we went through supply chain shocks. We have then gone through, a very rapid rise in interest rates across the world, especially in the developed nations, where you've gone from almost interest rates that were sub 1%, closer to almost zero, to now over 5.5% in terms of the USD context. So, you've had these multiple shocks. And as you say, you've also had wars in now, the Middle East, as well as in Ukraine. And so we've lived with, it feels like several or, multiple crises at the same time. And this has been very, very challenging. In terms of global foreign direct investment, I think, there was a significant slowdown in 2022. But we are, we're seeing things rebound now in 2023. If you look at the first quarter or the first half so far in 2023, global FDI has reached about $440 billion, which is almost triple of what it was in Q4 of 2022. The surprising thing is that if you look at it, FDI inflows, the largest inflows have actually been into the United States at about 109 billion. And the next two countries are Brazil and China. The sources of that FDI, again, the United States is the largest there in terms of FDI. And then you have Germany and China. So huge sums of money that are moving around. And I think some of this has to do with supply chains changing in the world. After COVID, people realized that they need more reliability, shorter supply chains. And you can see countries like Mexico, for instance, and Canada have benefited quite significantly from these changes.
So supply chain is one factor. What are the other factors that are contributing to this positivity and solid inflows globally?
I think, people are also looking at diversifying risk. So where do they want to set up? India has become much more significant in terms of being a part of global supply chains. And the Indian government has really stressed made in India. And their focus has also shifted towards an export side rather than just domestic. China has seen a slowdown, although you can see they've been a source of FDI. Things have not quite returned to pre-COVID times in China as yet. We saw a rebound in 2021, but things have kind of stuttered there. So we are seeing areas, you can see that also in places like Vietnam, there's been tremendous growth. It's an extremely productive country, so there's more investment going in there. You're also seeing more investment going into the African countries. Some of that is because you have lower labor costs, a young labor force. So you're seeing movement of investment there. I think a lot of these flows also depend on where it's easy for people to actually come in and establish businesses. And that's something that's really crucial for Sri Lanka to think about as, we come out of our own economic crisis.
And if we look at the home picture now, how has Sri Lanka been doing in terms of FDIs this year?
Right. So I think, we've also as a nation had a challenging 3 years. 2019, we had the Easter attacks. And then in 2020 till 2022, we essentially had 2 years of terrible impact from COVID, especially in terms of tourism and in terms of just the local economy and our ability as a government to be able to service our debt, lack of foreign exchange. And then we went into an economic crisis last year. And I think, perhaps if we go back and we say, if this hadn't happened or that hadn't happened, maybe we wouldn't have been in the same position in 2022. But equally, I think, this is a crisis that has taught us many lessons. And I believe the government has actually actively addressed those concerns, and going into a program with the IMF has helped. In terms of FDI, obviously, it's been a very challenging environment. The instability brought on by, an exchange rate that devalued very sharply, high interest rates. And last year, of course, we had challenges in terms of our utilities as well, a lack of access to things like petroleum, lack of electricity. So all of those, make it very unstable and made it unattractive for foreign investors. I'm glad to say that I think we've turned a corner. The government and the central bank have certainly addressed many of these issues, and we're on a path of reform. And I think with the IMF program, you're beginning to see stabilization. It gives foreign investors comfort that Sri Lanka is taking a more sustainable path. So I think, we've seen FDI inflows in the first half of this year of about $288 million, which is not bad. I think, unfortunately, if you look at, post-war Sri Lanka, we haven't done that well in terms of attracting FDI. And I think this is something that we have to look at and address carefully. And I do believe the government, actually, if you look at the policy reforms that they're looking at, is trying to address these issues. It's not just about tax incentives. We've done that for a long time. But it's also a lot to do with the various components of the ease of doing business in Sri Lanka. And I think it's very important that those are addressed.
Like you said, Anarkali, tax incentives are one method of attracting FDIs, but of course, they should not be the only one. How can Sri Lanka be more investor friendly if we start from the regulatory environment, for instance?
So I think one of the challenges, as I said, having been an investment banker here for 20 years and, really focused on cross-border capital flows into the country, one of the challenges is policy being ad hoc. Not having consistent policies is very challenging to foreign investors. Long-term policy consistency is a fundamental. And I think that's something that, is very important. When you have these changes and reversals, that undermines investor confidence. So policy is key. I think reforms in terms of when we talk about ease of doing business, so when you look at the ability to get approvals and permits, making those more efficient, addressing things like a lack of land for industrial enterprises, labor laws, the ease of being able to not only hire and train people, but also if you have to go, if you have to come into companies and you have to restructure, and if you have to, lay off labor, or if you have issues with labor, how can those be addressed in equitable ways, but also efficient ways? I think we will probably have to also look at the skill sets that we have going forward. We have challenges in terms of our access to export markets. I think, again, the government is looking at free trade agreements and multilateral agreements, especially into East Asia and the ASEAN countries. And I think those will definitely help. Because, again, going back to these supply chains, I think Sri Lanka needs to figure out how to integrate ourselves into the region and into ASEAN, so that you can attract investors and they feel that there's a good incentive for them to actually be based in Sri Lanka. I think the stability that we now have, again, with both electricity and fuel is helping in terms of securing the long-term sustainability of those. That's very important. The reforms of the CEB as well as the CEPC will definitely help. And I think it gives investors then confidence. We can also see a pipeline of state-owned enterprises that are going to come into the market. And several of them have been announced, as you know, from the Hilton and the Hyatt to Lanka Hospitals and Sri Lankan Airlines. I think those are large potential FDI transactions. But again, policy is important. We have to have policy consistency, and foreign investors have to be confident that once their investments are made, they're secure. There's no turning back from these, that procedures have been followed properly, and they're secure in the knowledge that the investments are going to be long-term and secure in their hands.
It's now time to take a short break, but we'll soon come back to talk more about FDIs.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight, we're talking with Anarkali Moonesinghe, Director at Anemoi Investments, Advisory Board Member for Advocata, and Board Member at the Lankan Angel Network. So ASEAN is definitely a very lucrative market for us to focus on. And when we are looking at being attractive to countries, what approach do you think we should take? I mean, should we focus on particular countries for particular industries? And if so, what industries are we looking at, and what are looking most promising when it comes to attracting FDIs into Sri Lanka?
I think it's difficult to target according to countries. I think, like you said, it's more to do with industries and looking at, where would we be attractive? Interestingly, Sri Lanka obviously has this, fantastic garment sector. We have some of the largest companies in the region, and they are world-renowned. And they are now international in their own right. They're not just in Sri Lanka in terms of operations. We also have some of the largest natural rubber manufacturers in the world who are based in Sri Lanka. So we do have capabilities, and I think we have to build on those capabilities. The labor force, we probably do need to skill them properly to attract people from those industries. I think I'd seen somewhere that Sri Lanka doesn't attract the sexy industries, like if it's tech or biotech, industrial production, that's kind of, the cutting edge. We're not quite there as yet. And I think, once you have stability in terms of infrastructure, policy, and then finding people with the right skill sets, you can attract these industries. As to how the government targets those, that's harder. I think you have to look at what's available in terms of our current skill sets. But, going back to just, if you leave the government out of it, if we put in the key foundations, as I said, making it easy for companies to do business here, they will do that on their own. Industries will come and set up because they are then able to do that, and they find it easy to come in and access markets. I think the trade agreements would help, having easier exchange rate controls, so that trade companies can actually function. That would help better access to banking facilities. So these are fundamentals that we can put in place, and hopefully that will attract several businesses.
When we talk about attracting investors from different countries into different industries like tech especially, is it correct to say that India is taking the lead? And if so, what are the implications of it?
So I think FDI from India has certainly increased. If you look at it, I think in 2022, FDI from India was $238 million compared to $177 million in 2018. You are seeing large Indian companies such as Adani coming into an agreement for Colombo Port for one of the keys, and joining with one of our largest conglomerates. We also see that they're interested in the power sector with wind power. And then you have a company like HCL, which has set up a very large operation here now with almost 1,000 people. So those are really encouraging moves, and it's great to see that there's more Indian investment coming in. I think the finance minister of India has said recently that they are certainly looking to improve investments into Sri Lanka and to support Sri Lanka's new economic journey.
In your previous answers, you mentioned the importance of having enabling labor laws and also on the importance of addressing labor issues like skill gaps. So if we focus a little bit on this area, on talent, how should we, Sri Lanka, from a governmental and maybe a national perspective, how should we work on improving our talent?
So I think one of the things we're really missing is women in the workforce. We have a very low percentage of women in the workforce right now. And I think that's a key focus, that we have to change some of our labor laws to enable women to be able to be participants in this labor force. Companies also have to change or institute new policies to support women. I was recently watching an Advocata program and on women in the labor force, and John Keels has announced a program where they will have paternal leave in addition to maternal leave, so that then employers don't see women as almost a burden because you take maternal leave. So I think these are really important policies. I think listening to company CEOs talk about how they're now building better infrastructure to make sure that women are in the labor force, from just basic things like having proper changing rooms and facilities for women. Also companies in the tech side like WSO2 that are, not only running creches, but actually having daycare within their, headquarters in their office, which means that both parents, whether they're male or female, are comfortable that they have somewhere that their child can go and they're safe during the time that they're at work. And then they're able to go home. I think these sorts of things are really important, so that you can actually bring women into the labor force. There's some mind shift change there as well that has to come, that people have to be comfortable with women working in certain industries, that you're confident about their safety, and that we're looking to engage women more in across the board in various sectors. I think also we then have to look at skilling up our youth, and it's not just also increasing the pathways. I think it's not just university, but you want people to look at more vocational training. We lose so many young people from their O levels to A levels and then higher education. And I think there has to be a shift there, that, the old culture of having, it's not really old, the culture of having polytechnics works very well in other nations. You have very highly skilled people that come out and can actually serve these sexy industries. So these are things that we have to look at and see how we put into place. It's not a quick fix. It will take us time. But, when you've had a crisis, it's a good time to look at what needs to change and then make those changes.
We often talk of improvements that are needed to attract FDIs, which often are in the hands of the government or investors or companies. Yet if I ask you, how should the picture change at ground level? Like you said, what kind of changes do we need in our mindsets, including, of course, all the indirect stakeholders too, such as the general public, so that we can all work together to make Sri Lanka more attractive for foreign investments?
So I think, each of us individually have to understand that to build ourselves, nothing is really free. Nothing is easy and nothing is free. And we have to learn that when people make us those promises, they can very often be false promises. So I think as individuals, we have to strive to find out as much information as possible, and hold our elected leaders accountable. Equally, we have to hold ourselves accountable. We need to be civic-minded. We have to look at going beyond just wanting government jobs and pensions, that there will be certainly pain in some of those sectors. And ideally, we would like people reskilled so that they can move on to jobs in the private sector. Ideally, we want young people to be excited to work in the private sector and engaged in wanting to create something different. It's not easy, because when you say, what can we do to make ourselves more attractive to, foreign investment, I think there's many things that we do really well. We have really, really talented people in this country, from engineers to graphic designers to, we have a lot of very talented people. But I think sometimes that is overshadowed by things that can go wrong, or, within institutions or beyond. So I think as individuals, I would encourage people to keep striving. It's been a very, very tough 18 months. And it's a challenge. I mean, for many people, they're facing very, very challenging times. And it's not easy. So I hope that over the next 18 to 24 months that people can also, it's a stability, have stability within their own lives, better access to income over the next couple of years, that their incomes will rise, and that hard work will pay off, over the next couple of years, that will bear fruit.
We've been talking a lot, and you've been sharing some very interesting perspectives, but we're almost at the end of our conversation today. However, before we go, any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave with our viewers tonight?
I think, we've gone through a very hard crisis in Sri Lanka and very challenging times, but I think there's a lot that has been learned. And I think that going forward, we as individuals need to hold our leadership accountable. We have to be more civic minded. Hopefully we are going to grow from a stronger foundation that's being laid right now. And in 10 years, we will be a much stronger nation for that.
We've been talking with Anarkali Moonesinghe, Director at Anemoi Investments, Advisory Board Member for Advocata, and Board Member at the Lankan Angel Network. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Anarkali.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Randy, for having me.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.